Our Kaiser Jeep project presents a tricky challenge. How can we add modern high-performance parts and still keep the soul of this vintage military truck? Today on Xtreme Off-Road, we draw up a plan of action and get to work. Plus, we'll drop a manual trans into our Focus and break it in with a few rally stages.
We're going to kick things off today by having a look at our latest project, this Jeep M715 that we pulled out of a junkyard. Now, yes, I know we've got a lot of things on the go right now, but you can't turn your back on a rig like this when you find it. And for this project, we've got something pretty cool planned. These 1.25 ton trucks were commissioned by the U.S. military and built in Toledo, Ohio. They were a versatile platform used as pickups, ambulances, and troop carriers. They cost the U.S. government just over $4,000 per truck, and Kaiser Jeep built right around 30,000 of them. I found this one at our local junkyard, where it had been dropped off for scrap. I knew that it had to be saved, so I bought it, hauled it back to the Xtreme shop, where it will take on a new life as an off-road cab truck. Project names can come from anywhere, and this truck earned its name the minute I opened the door and had a look at all of the rust on the inner floorboards. The rest of the truck is in pretty good shape, but riding around inside this cab, there's a good chance that you could get some tetanus. That's why we're calling it Project Lockjaw. The outside of this truck oozes character, wearing almost 50 years of well-earned patina. So the faded red over the original olive drab green paint is gonna stay. But what about the rest of the truck? I get asked all the time, where do the ideas for the projects come from? Now on a truck like this, the project showed up, but the direction that we take it, sometimes you just gotta follow the vehicle's lead. There is no way that we're gonna be restoring this old Jeep. So this original straight six overhead cam engine is of no use to us. Yeah, we'll pull it out and save it because it's pretty cool, but they were not reliable and maintaining them was very difficult, not to mention not a lot of horsepower. Plus, this truck deserves something a lot better, and I picked it up at the junkyard. Before I left the junkyard with our Kaiser Jeep, I took a look at all the different options for engines that I could swap underneath the hood. There were some GM 5.3s, some 6 liters, some big blocks, even a diesel, but this caught my eye. This is an 07 5.7 liter Dodge truck Hemi. From the factory, it has 345 horsepower. That is 2.5 times the amount of horsepower that the Kaiser left the factory with back in the 60s. And it's the perfect swap for this project. Modern Jeeps have Hemis underneath the hood. Now behind it, I'm gonna reuse the stock 545 RFE transmission. It's a 5-speed overdrive automatic. And this is an example of where when you're picking parts for a project, you don't just wanna open up a catalog and throw a bunch of money at it. You gotta think it out. The Hemi is the perfect fit. It came from the junkyard. It'll match our Jeep perfectly. And just like any good build, the first step is to start tearing it apart. Number 1 on my list is this goofy galvanized aluminum roof that a previous owner had bolted onto the top of the Jeep. Then I'll clean out the back. Get rid of all these spare parts that were thrown in the back to add extra weight to this rig when it was rolled across the scales at the scrapyard. Then I'll prep the bed for a very important body mod. The list of body mods on this truck, very minimal. The plan right now is to simply bob the bed or take the rear part of the bed, move it forward almost 18 inches, even with the rear leaf spring swing shackle to improve the departure angle of the rig when we're off-road. It'll still keep that classic look, but we'll be able to wheel it a little bit better. Aside from that, I'll have a canvas top made for the top to get rid of that goofy galvanized roofing. I'm going to leave it leaf sprung suspension all the way around because I think that's cool. Throw a couple 1-tons underneath it, some 40s. This is going to be one bad truck.
Got a job that's got to get done, but you don't have the right tool? Build it yourself.
Today was supposed to be a day with a bunch of little finishing touches on our Ford Focus rally car, but that is not what's going to happen. After spending some time at a rally training school, I knew I wanted to make one last change to this car, and it's going to be a big one. Now, a lot of you guys have given me a bunch of feedback about our Project Hocus Focus. Some of you love it, some of you hate it, but no matter which way you lean, you have to admit that we have been able to build a functioning race car for less than $5,000. It all started when we picked up this stock Ford Focus hatchback for under $1,000. The first order of business was to evaluate the car and replace any worn out parts in the suspension. At the same time, I upgraded the shocks, struts, and springs. Then we took on the engine with a mild tune-up and a few performance goodies. A set of snow tires and steel wheels would get us race ready. And then it was time to make this Focus into an actual race car with a full rally spec cage and a set of racing seats. The big project I've got planned for Hocus Focus today is not that hard, just labor intensive. I'm going to convert this car from an automatic transmission to a manual. To remove the transmission, the linkage, exhaust, and axles are disconnected. Oh, big fluid. Bell housing bolts are removed, and the flex plate is rotated to access the torque converter bolts through the window below the starter. With the car lowered, the battery box and airbox assembly need to be removed to get access to the upper transmission mount. Now this is where things become a little bit different because we're dealing with a transversely mounted engine in a front-wheel drive car. If we were removing the transmission from a rear-wheel drive engine, the engine would stay put when we removed the transmission because the block has mounts on either side. Front-wheel drive cars like our Focus have a mount at the front of the engine and at the back of the transmission, basically mounting the drivetrain as a package. Now the problem is we want to remove the transmission, and the next step is to remove that rear upper transmission mount. If we don't support the engine, it'll just fall out of the bottom of the car. Now yeah, sure, we could slide a jack underneath it and jack it up underneath the oil pan, but then we couldn't put the car up and down on the lift anymore. Now, a mechanic shop or a specialized transmission shop has a tool to solve this problem. It basically anchors off the radiator shell and off the back of the strut towers and hangs the motor from this hook right here. Now, I don't have that tool because I don't work on a lot of front-wheel drive cars here in the XOR shop. What I do have is a bunch of tubing and some welders. Using some scrap angle iron and a piece of 1.5" DOM, an engine support tool is built using a C-clamp to hold up the back of our engine. Then the upper mount can be removed, and the transmission is ready to drop out the bottom of our Focus. Last step, removing the flex plate from the crankshaft.
Up next, a man who knows the Focus inside and out stops by with a manual transmission and some installation advice. Then we'll push our rally car to the limit.
With our automatic transmission out of the way, the first step in converting our Ford Focus over to manual will be to replace some items on the engine. I picked up a new flywheel and pressure plate and clutch assembly just from a local parts supplier. But before I bolt those on, I'm going to take care of a few oil leaks on the bottom of the engine. Our engine's been leaking oil, and it didn't take us long to figure out why. I think that's all they put on it was some silicone. That is why it's leaking. With the oil pan removed, a new gasket is installed, as well as a new rear main seal. Before the flywheel can go on, the crank sensor retainer must be swapped over to a manual transversion. Then the flywheel and clutch kit are installed. We scoured our local junkyards for all the parts needed to convert this Focus with no luck. Then I found Speedway Recyclers, a Ford Focus specific junkyard.
I like to think it's the world's largest Ford Focus collection. Got about 150 cars, 27 SVTs.
And the owner, Matt Rowe, offered to drop off everything we'd need. He brought a pile of parts, from the crank sensor retainer we just installed to a new transmission, shifter, and shift cables, full wiring harness, pedal assembly, and even some axle shafts. Once the new trans is bolted onto the engine, the shafts are installed, and the new motor and transmission mounts are put into place. The next step in this swap is specific to our race car. If I was building a street legal car here, I'd want to install the transmission wiring harness, feed it up underneath the dash, so it's like a factory install. It still had a clutch safety switch as well as reverse lights on the shifter. I don't need to worry about that. I'm going to start the motor with a push button on the dash, and if I need reverse lights, I'll just add a switch. This is an off-road race car. One thing you do need to make sure when you're doing this swap is that you get a matching ECU for the car with key and the tumblers that go inside the steering column, because there is a theft deterrent setup built into these two pieces, and it needs to be a manual transmission computer to make the engine run. Then it's just a bunch of little stuff. I got to swap in a new pedal assembly, I got to add the shifter and the shifter cables, and this new master cylinder reservoir that not only feeds the brakes, it also feeds our new hydraulic clutch. Then we'll have converted this Focus from an automatic to a manual. After our trip to the rally school, I knew I wanted to convert our Focus over to a manual transmission and upgrade the rear braking to improve the handbrake turns. Easiest way to do that is to perform a rear disc brake conversion. I looked around the junkyards, couldn't find the parts and pieces I needed. I did find a company named Massive Speed, and they specialize in rear disc brake conversions for the Focus. It uses a combination of factory and aftermarket parts. Some SVT hubs, set of aftermarket rotors, some stock Focus rear calipers and bridges, as well as e-brake cables, brake hoses, and brake pads. What makes the kit all work together is the Massive Speed bracket that will bolt on to the rear drum brake spindle and allow us to convert it over to rear disc brakes. That means we got the best of both worlds. We're able to replace parts and pieces with just factory items if they ever wear out, but we don't need to dig and find that elusive, hard to find rear disc brake spindle for the back of the Focus. All we need is this bracket. The rear drum assembly is removed and the Massive Speed brackets are bolted into place. The hubs, rotors, and caliper assembly are installed, and this vehicle is ready to race.
This software records all kinds of data on the racetrack, using little more than your cell phone.
We're back down here at Florida International Rally and Motorsports Park, not for more driver training, but because they're putting on a NASA-sanctioned rally. But we didn't come to watch. We brought our Ford Focus down here to see how it handles in the dirt. Driving this Focus at speed through a rally stage is simply flat out fun. Now I know that a little hatchback like this might not be everyone's idea of extreme off-roading, but when it comes to this rally car, numbers don't lie. I bought this Focus for $1,000, rebuilt the suspension, front and rear, and tuned up the engine for right around $1,250. Cage and seats came in at just over $1,200, tires and wheels $350. Converting it from an automatic to a manual transmission, $1,000 in used parts. Then the rear disc brake conversion rounded it out at $500. Toss in an extra $1,100 for odds and ends like a helmet, Hans device, roof vent, and the required mud flaps. I have a grand total of $6,400 into this race car. Yep, I said it, a full-blown rally prep race car for under $7,000. And that is a bargain considering you get to do stuff like this. We're here at the firm to get some baseline data on our Focus to see how it would compare with the cars competing in the actual race. To help do that, I had Jay from HP Tuners hook my Focus up with a new phone app called the Track Addict.
HP Tuners is really excited to bring an iPhone Android-based app that allows you to communicate via the OBD2 interface, and it also utilizes the GPS on the phone or an external GPS if you want finer resolution. You also have the ability to utilize the accelerometer in the phone and link all that together with the camera. So you position the camera nicely so you have a shot out the windshield, and as you're driving, you're recording all this data. You can see if you're getting ignition retard coming out of a corner. Your deceleration rates. Are you slowing down fast enough, or do you need to start changing brake pad materials? Whatever you might be working on for that session. You're really approaching a full standalone data logging system.
With the phone mounted in the windshield, I would run a single stage that's been set up for tomorrow's actual rally race. Then compare my times with the actual race cars. Off the line with the Focus maxed out, I took to the stage with one mission: drive the tires off this Focus in an attempt to lay down a good time. The Focus worked great, pulling across the skid pad in third gear, flat out, just over 40 miles an hour. The back end would start to get a little bit loose, but with some slight throttle input, it would straighten right back out. Onto the road course with the tires squealing, and then back into the dirt. A good high-speed straight, into a hard left, and over the jump. Yep, you heard me, jump. This little Ford Focus can fly. Finally, a few more twisties, and boom, across the flying finish with a time of 2 minutes, 41 seconds. Pretty much on pace with similar cars. Juan Cardozo, in a comparable Focus, would run this stage at 2:14, while Matt Earl in his Focus would do it 2:50. Our project is on pace to be an actual race car. But there were more rally stages to run for fun. And with unlimited access to a race course, you know I'm gonna take advantage of that. And trust me, ripping through the woods and down tight gravel roads in a small car like Project Hocus Focus is worthy of the title, Xtreme Off-Road.